So glad to be here with you on stage. Dear Mrs. President Zourabichvili, dear Anne Applebaum, and dear guests here in the Literaturhaus. We do all have so many questions these days here at the Security Conference in Munich, when old, long-time grown alliances and a safe ground of solidarity and common virtues seem to erode. And to quote German Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius after the speech of Vice President JD Vance on Friday, he said, "I am not sure if I got him right by saying that the real threats of democracy are the anti-democratic tendencies within the European Union, not in Russia or China." Well, and when our Minister of Defense is not sure, so how can we be? How can we be sure if the US President will let the European Union be part of the negotiations of a peace treaty for the Ukraine? How can we be sure if US troops would be ready to defend European countries, NATO allies, after a possible attack from Russia? Seeing German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock live on television Friday night saying, "We get different signals from the US government." Different signals in questions of survival. These are threatening times, of course, especially for the people in the Ukraine under constant Russian attack for 3 years now, and for the people of Georgia living under constant threat of growing Russian influence for many years. So I'm extremely thankful to be sitting here on this panel discussing what we heard within the last days, looking for some answers. So glad to welcome you, dear Mrs. President Zourabichvili. You experienced most directly how elections can be manipulated, how hard it is to stay in power when hidden influence, financed by maybe some superpower in the shadows of the social media world, takes place. You are and have been living some kind of European dream life. Being born in the city of Paris, your grandparents had left Georgia after the communists had taken power. You knew this dreamlike country in the very far east only by the stories from your grandparents at the dinner table. And you became an extremely successful, popular diplomat for your home country, France, in countries like Chad, Italy, and also within NATO, until finally becoming French ambassador in Tbilisi. And then the story has been told many times when accompanying President Mikhail Saakashvili to his visit to Paris and French President Jacques Chirac, he asked you on the plane to become his foreign minister. Changing job, changing countries, changing life within the duration of a flight. President Chirac had to give his okay, and he did so, and from that time on, you became an influential Georgian politician. After your time as foreign minister, you did not leave again for France, but stayed for making politics from the opposition, till you became the first female president of Georgia in 2018, elected in direct vote by the Georgian people. And now, the president of Georgia is no longer elected directly, but from the members of parliament. And there are strong hints that the last elections last year had been manipulated. The Georgian dream won and has a majority within the new elected parliament. The opposition did boycott the election of the new president within the parliament, and the majority did vote for Mikhail Kavelashvili from the party Georgian Dream, backed by the billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili. Since then, many people are protesting on the streets of Tbilisi. They are protesting against the new media law, following Russian example, protesting against the manipulation of the elections, and for their president, Salome Zourabichvili. So good to have you here. And her biography did lead her from even further west to the east, from Washington, D.C. to Warsaw. I'm very glad to welcome the most influential and most respected historian of Eastern Europe of our times, and one of the most powerful commentators of the European political present, winner of the Pulitzer Prize and last year the Friedenspreis des Deutschen Buchhandels, Anne Applebaum. She did start her career as a book author, writing down the results of many, many years of interviews and research about the Soviet Gulag system, followed by the book The Iron Curtain, dealing with the question how a Soviet Union could get and hold so many years so great influence on its side, on the curtain. Her last book, called Autocracy Incorporate, deals with the new and old kleptocracies in the world, the new, sometimes surprising, sometimes hidden alliances between countries like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And we learn that there is nothing like a curtain anymore, not even clearly separated zones of interest anymore, but the curtain is fluent, the line is fluent, we are all, especially Germany and the US, in economic dependence with each other. And the threatening consequences of that fluidity we can see among many other tendencies within these Munich days. It is since the year 2013, and Applebaum said that she feels European. 2013 was the year when the Maidan protests did start. One of its consequences was a big fear of Vladimir Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping of the dangerous, lightful attraction of the European Union and an open and free and democratic society. I think 1 year later, and Applebaum got a second citizenship beside the US American, the Polish one, and then, after the Russian occupation of Crimea, she kept on encouraging Europe to be ready to defend itself and to support the Ukraine in military and financial way as strong as possible. Especially Germany should have learned from its history not to favor the heroic state of pacifism, but the ability to defend yourself and be able to protect you and your allies against anti-democratic fascist regimes. And speaking here in Munich, the Literaturhaus, you all passed, I think, the beer from the house of Thomas Mann. It was among others that Thomas Mann, who Applebaum did quote in her speech in the Paulskirche, and his widely heard speeches during Second World War, from the United States to the Deutsche Hörer. Pacifism is not a weapon against fascism, but makes it possible and powerful. And to come to the present, in her dark humor, Anne Applebaum described Olaf Scholz's last phone call some weeks ago with Vladimir Putin as some kind of belief in magical phones of our Chancellor. She does not share this belief. Anne Applebaum's latest book is dedicated to all optimists. So I would say to all of us here. I'm very excited to talk to you, Mrs. President Zourabichvili, and you, Anne Applebaum, about good reasons for you and our optimism. So first of all, to you, Mrs. President Zourabichvili, what's your personal and political situation right now after the election and after, well, leaving the palace but not leaving the presidency?
Leaving the palace, yes, not leaving the presidency, and not leaving the country. Many people are asking me, you're still there? Yes, I'm still there, and I will be there because the protests in Georgia are there. The new name for the protests in Georgia is To the End, and so is it for me. I will be there to the end, and I am an optimist, so I think that the end will be the return to European Georgia.
I actually don't know what the official, if there is an official position of the European Union concerning the elections and what the next steps might be.
Well, the European Union is as usual, but there is no recognition of either the elections or of the existing government. So we are in this no man's land where not yet nobody says, well, the elections were not free and fair, but they don't say that they were free and fair. They don't say that this government is illegitimate, but they don't meet with the government. And the government is very looking for any handshake that they can find to demonstrate to the population that they are not completely isolated. But frankly, I don't know what ruling party, really ruled by one man, can do, and what rhetoric, what measures, what laws can a ruling party take to be condemned by the European Union more than what they have been doing in the past 2 years and months.
And Applebaum, what's your point of view to the situation in Georgia? And is it, in general, does it fit in the system that you described in your last book of the Autocracies Incorporated? Because I think, as we all know, there is a very, very powerful and very rich man in the back in the country.
So, first of all, thank you very much for that very frank introduction. It's a pleasure to be here again. I actually did a presentation of my book in this exact room a few months ago, so maybe some of you were there. I don't know. And it's a pleasure to be back in Munich. Georgia is actually an excellent example of what could await us all. Georgia is a country that was a democracy and had a legitimate democratic system. However, an you could call it autocratic, anti-liberal, political party using what we might call populist or anti-elitist language won an election, and then, having won the election, began to dismantle the institutions of the state. I think a lot of us have in our minds the idea that democracy, when it fails, there's a coup d'etat, and there's some tanks in the street, and there's, a lieutenant colonel who shoots a hole in the chandelier at the presidential palace. That is actually not how democracy now fails. Most democracies now fail because a legitimate leader, an elected leader, begins to change the rules. And we see this happening, in Georgia. We see it happening. We saw it already happen in Hungary. In Poland, it began to happen, but it was stopped. And of course, there's a version now going on in the United States, and that's we'll discover what happens later on. Why is it happening now? Why is there more of this now than there was 20 years ago? Partly it is because of the power of money, that the very wealthy billionaires who have access to tools of control, or who have access to media or social media, can change the nature of conversations. It is also because of what I describe in my book, which is there is a network of autocratic states. Who are not aligned ideologically, but who do work together, and they work together politically and financially, and also in terms of building propaganda. And of course, you can see this very clearly in Georgia, where Russia is not formally playing a role in Georgian politics, but is a motivating factor behind almost everything the ruling party does. And they've successfully, one of the things that the Georgian regime uses is this autocratic set of arguments, that autocracy is stable and safe, and democracy is weak and divided, and we will protect you from war, and we will keep you safe at a difficult moment, and we stand for traditional hierarchies, and they are degenerate, and we represent the people, and they represent the elite, and that's part of the autocratic model propaganda that you now hear being repeated in so many countries, including this one. So we see this. We see this shift is happening. We've seen it in multiple countries, and Georgia is a really startling and outstanding example. I would say the difficulty now is that there are, and I feel this very strongly about Georgia, is that there are so many, so much about in the liberal world is breaking down right now. It's very hard for people to have the attention in this space to focus on all the places where it's happening. Maybe you feel that as well, that there's a kind of distraction. What's going on in Georgia would have been a central issue in European politics 10 years ago. And now it's more difficult for people to find the time because there's so many other crises.
Well, I would disagree with a number of assertions. The first one is that they didn't win the elections.
No, excuse me, I didn't mean this election. They didn't win this election.
They came to power.
I meant in the past.
Yes.
Excuse me. No, of course this election was manipulated.
But that's important because of the following argument. The Russians won the elections through an incredible and very sophisticated operation against the Georgian people that we are still discovering every day all the elements of this sophisticated operation. Just some weeks ago, we found out that all the personal information data about every Georgian citizen is out in the air. And that is linked to the fact that during the election, they used more than 3,000 call centers that had been operating in the country for a different reason in the previous years. So it's not planned.
No, excuse me. What I meant was they were elected some years ago, and then they were able to change the political system in a way that enabled
They changed many things, and they prepared very thoroughly with, which is something that is much beyond their intellectual capacities. So with the help of others and of the services of our neighbor, they prepared very steadily what would be these elections. And that's what is important, and that's my second very more important point. I don't think that the situation that is in Georgia is a question of political crisis and only of an autocracy coming instead of a democracy. That's very much the case. But what is important is that here we have at work a strategy of Russia. And if we do not see the big picture and we only concentrate, then Georgia is not important. It's another small country that has fallen to autocracy, to a rich oligarch, and it's 3,700,000 people. So what? Why should we worry? We should worry because, like in 2008, when Russia tested its military strategy in Georgia and nobody reacted because it was a small country, and after all it's the back space of Russia, and so why worry? It's just a continuation of the old policies. And then we had Crimea, and then we had Ukraine. In the same way, what happened to the Georgian elections last year is the beginning of the new hybrid strategy of Russia.
Yeah. And
it started in Georgia. It did not succeed yet in Moldova because they had the diaspora. We couldn't use our diaspora because it was prevented. They had learned the lesson. It was tried in Romania, but for the time being did not succeed, but we have to watch very closely the next elections. It happens all around the Black Sea, very strange, and Ukraine. And my main message is not about Georgia. My main message is about Ukraine. Russia did not win the war in Ukraine. Whatever they want to pretend, 3 years after, Russia has not met any of its objectives. Russia is much weaker than it has ever been and will remain weak for a long time. Russia has not, despite what we all feel since yesterday, we were very shocked and suddenly pessimistic. No, Russia has not won the peace talks. And I hope very much that the European Union is gathering and putting its act together, and Russia will not win the peace talks the way it thinks it will, the way it has projected some form of already victory. I think that Trump is as unpredictable for Putin as he is unpredictable for all of us. So let's see and let's defend the peace talks. Ukraine is not going to accept any peace talks, but Ukraine has to be supported as it was supported during the war. It has to be supported during these peace talks and after. And that's my main point. My main point is about the Ukrainian elections. I was very worried yesterday. I was worried by Mr. Vance's words about Romanian elections, where he has completely missed the point, and he should be told so. But I'm worried about yesterday the questions to Mr. Zelensky about elections in Ukraine. Because the way Russia, through this hybrid strategy, intends to win over Ukraine is neither through war, neither through the peace talks, because they're not sure, and they're rightly so. Through the elections, because if they apply the strategy that they've used in Georgia, to which nobody has reacted, not even to the point to dare and call me the president of Georgia. I'm everywhere the fifth president. What does that mean? We do not count presidents like in the United States. It's either the illegitimate government or it's me, and it's not in between. So why don't they decide? But if nobody reacts there, if nobody reacts in Romania, the Ukrainian elections will be the ground in which Russia will try to win over Ukraine. And can you imagine elections after 3 years of war, after peace talks that will most probably neither be a complete victory of one or the other, how easy it will be for the Russian propaganda to play all the themes that we know. If Russian propaganda was able to scare the Georgians that have been fighting for their independence, freedom for centuries, not only for the last 2 centuries, but for centuries, and that they have believed that maybe the Europeans and the Americans was more of a threat of a war than Russia, then can you imagine what the Russian propaganda can do in Ukraine after the war, in a destroyed Ukraine? And don't forget that Putin is not a military leader, and he has shown so. He cannot do it. He's not a politician. He's a KGB man. And what he knows how to do, it's these manipulative things. And the schemes that were used in Georgia should be studied. You should all defend your elections. I'm not talking about German elections. Let's see what happens. But that's something that is tested, and is tested first for the Black Sea, because that has always been the main objective of Russia. But it can be then expanded to anyone. And we're all in very weak positions because we do not see it, we do not want to see the big picture, and we're looking at smaller pictures.
Mm-hmm. And I'd really thank you very much. I'd really like to come back later to the special example of Georgia, although it's small, but I think there are many tendencies that you can see in this small, compared small country. For example, the influence of Bidzina Ivanishvili that you might have experienced yourself, of the man who owns, I think, more money than the whole Georgian state. But talking about JD Vance, let's come back to this really, for many of us, shocking speech. I read from Timothy Snyder a short translation of the speech, saying in Vance English, free speech means let Musk run your elections, and democracy, let Russia run your elections. What was your translation in Applebaum of the speech, and what results do you think it's going to have for Europe?
So, I mean, let me tie together what you've just said about the possibility of manipulating elections. You know, in the case of Georgia, it was through multiple small things, which were hard to see nationally. Right. I mean, and there were individual places, and there was the use of changed voter data and so on. And then what we see coming from the big social media platforms, in particular Twitter or X, is an attempt to manipulate conversations algorithmically, so that certain kinds of messages get through more frequently, and people see certain things more often than other things. And this we know happened in the U.S. election. It's been, I mean, you could see it if you were online and you were just a normal participant in online conversation, but it's also been studied since the election and proven to be so. And so, taking a step back, there's a big question now as to whether, I mean, let's stick to European democracies, but of course it's true of democracies anywhere, whether democracies are still able to set their own rules and able to have their own elections. And I fully agree with you that what happened in Georgia is exactly what they tried to do in Moldova. It is related to what they were trying to do in Romania. And it could eventually come to all of us. European countries, I mean, different ones have different electoral rules. They have laws about about political funding, or they have some countries like Germany have laws about hate speech, right? I mean, that's part of your tradition that Germany has since the 1940s. It doesn't mean that you're not a democracy. You just have these rules, and you've agreed to the rules. What the and these are two different cases. What the social media companies are beginning to argue, in essence, is that nobody should be allowed to have any rules, that we set the rules. What happened in Romania, which was absolutely mischaracterized by Vance, was that the candidate who won the first round of the Romanian presidential election had broken the rules. He or somebody in his name had spent $1 million on TikTok, which, by the way, Vance kind of dismissed as some hundred, who can have this little $100,000. I mean, in Romania, $1 million spent on political advertising is a lot of money. So my husband ran an election campaign for the European Parliament in Poland, and the limit of his campaign was 30,000 euros. That's how much he spent. So we don't have the American-style system in Poland or in Romania of you can spend millions and billions of dollars of dark money and nobody knows where it comes from. In Romania, there are rules, and this candidate broke the rules, probably with Russian help, almost certainly. That's what the Romanians think. And so then the Romanian political system has a very difficult decision. Like, someone broke the rules. They lied in their election campaign. They had access to money they didn't declare. And so what is the Romanian state's job? Should they allow him to run anyway, or should they rerun the campaign? And they made the decision to rerun the campaign, which of course is terrible. I mean, it had a terrible impact on the Romanian political debate, and many people felt it was unfair, and so on and so on. But what you see is, it's not. If I could differ with you slightly, I don't think it's only Russian. It's Russian plus American and Chinese social media companies who are together able to. It's not even that they all have a strategy, but they are able to enable the manipulation of electoral laws and make changes to outcomes. And you are absolutely right that this will happen in Ukraine, or it will be tried in Ukraine. And I have been saying over the last 2 days repeatedly that the really dangerous moment in Ukraine is, first of all, if we ever get to a ceasefire. Right now the Russians are not looking like they want a ceasefire. They're still fighting. If we ever got to a ceasefire, the very dangerous moment would be in the weeks and months afterwards, immediately afterwards. Because, if they stop fighting, but there's no security guarantee, there's no certainty that the war is over for good. It might start up again at any time, or next year, or in 2027. Then you will find it very difficult to keep people in Ukraine. You will find investment in Ukraine impossible. And you will also have an enormous amount of political unrest in Ukraine. And you will have soldiers coming back from the front line some will be angry because they felt the aims of the war were not fulfilled. You'll have discontent, and you will have exactly the kind of atmosphere that you described that will make it very easy for either using social media platforms, or using money, or using the many different kinds of data and other manipulations used in Georgia. You will find it very easy to manipulate elections, and that is, Putin's ultimate goal in Ukraine is the same as it always was, and the goal is make Ukraine into a vassal state, make it part of Russia. It's the same as Putin's goal in Georgia, and not that can be accomplished in other ways. If they couldn't do it militarily, which they could not, either in Georgia or in Ukraine, then they will try to do it another way. So anyone believing that the war is over because Trump and Putin have met in Saudi Arabia, which apparently is going to happen quite soon, is making a grave mistake.
Yeah, it's a big picture, but maybe let's come back to make it concrete to the elections in Romania, because it was a central point in the speech of JD Vance, and I understood you right that what happened now in Romania is something good. And I think it's backed by the European Union, but it's Romanian law who made it. Well, we have to make it again, but obviously there have to be rules before that. So should this be the next step and implemented and stronger in the European Union?
So, you know, when I listened to Vance's speech, what I heard was him saying, and I heard a French politician say this last night. What he was saying is, don't use the Digital Services Act. So, as many of you may know, the EU has passed a law that would, in theory, enable them to regulate social media companies. You know, and I should say this regulation is not censorship, which is the language that Vance used and others used. The regulation would enable, for example, more transparency. You know, users would have a better idea of what they're seeing and why. I mean, the social media companies could tell you why, or, you know, how it could give you more access to the algorithm. They could let you shape the algorithm. The idea is not to censor people, but to offer more transparency and more openness. I mean, free speech is also about having more information and more understanding of where you are in the world and what's happening. The tech companies in the United States, and I just saw for breakfast somebody who comes from one of them, are very, very focused on not being regulated and not being regulated by the European Union. Right now, the only institution on the planet, literally, that is capable of doing any regulation of American tech. And this is not just social media, this is AI, this is everybody, Microsoft, everybody. The only institution that can do it is the EU. And this is, I believe, why you're hearing why you're hearing attacks on the EU from the US, and why you're hearing the promotion of anti-European political parties in the US, because they understand, just like the Russians understand, that if you want to break up the EU, you do it by promoting the anti-European movement in places like Germany.
And how do we, well, the European, one point after Trump came into power the second time is that every day there's a new story and a new sensation, a new dark sensation in the world, and we, or the European Union, is always in defense all this time. So what do you, and we all saw people in Georgia protesting and having such a positive and good picture of the European Union, but how can the European Union come back into an offensive role in the world?
I think by seeing the picture, and I think that there is a very big threat that is the technological and this networks threat. It's very clear, for instance, in our case, in Georgia, the media are more and more under pressure. In fact, they're trying to really completely crack down on the critical media through finances and through different things. The main problem is that you cannot talk to people outside of your own group, I would say, or circle, through the social media because of the algorithm. So the capacity to have even electoral themes, propaganda, or anything, or any discussion or real debate are more and more limited. And that's where we need the European Union. And that's where the European Union needs itself to defend itself. So I think more strengths to defend itself where it knows that the vulnerabilities are there.
And can you tell us a bit about the example in Georgia about Bidzina Ivanishvili and his money? And I think, as I read in the paper, that in the first election you seemed to be backed, or I don't know, by him and by his party, and it changed after some time. Can you just tell us?
It's a very, that's what happens, and that's also very important to see that picture. I was backed as an independent candidate for first the parliamentary elections and 1 year after for the presidential elections. I still don't know why. But I was ready to go in and I didn't have any problems with the worldview of the Georgian Dream at that time, because Georgian Dream was the party that introduced in the constitution the Article 78, which says that every institution in Georgia has a duty to do everything the utmost to favor and push the Euro-Atlantic integration of Georgia, which has been my all-time, not dream, but objective. So that was fine with me, and there was no sign except the fact that Mr. Ivanishvili had been in Russia and had made his money in Russia, but like most of the rich people in Georgia that then came back after the end of the Soviet Union. So we were all looking for signs, signals, but for some time there were none, and then signals started coming, and more and more, and more and more. In a way, it accelerated at two specific points. One was the start of the war in Ukraine, which might mean that the pressures from Moscow on their proxy, what now appears to be their proxy, became stronger, maybe through compromise, or they didn't need compromise, I don't know, and I will never know probably. And then it accelerated even more after the decision by the European Union to grant us the candidate status, which probably also means that Russia wanted to stop this pass and to do it as brutally as possible. And then we come to the end. During these years, the rhetoric against the Americans, against the Europeans, was aggressive, was destructive, and there was no reaction. The European ambassadors were treated like, I don't use the word, so was the American ambassador, and there was no strong reaction from the capitals to say, here's a country that pretends to be European, that is supported, every institution in Georgia has been supported by either the Americans or the Europeans or both together. And by the way, today in Georgia, there is not one single independent institution. They're all completely controlled. People are appointed by one party, and when I say one party, it's one man. Because all the decisions are by now taken by Ivanishvili, including that on 27th of November to say that they're going to stop the illegitimate government and parliament and everyone, decided that they can change what has been the mandate given by the people, which is we want the European integration, we want the Euro-Atlantic integration. They suddenly said, no, that's not our objective. And that's what started the major protests. We had protests against the Russian law once, second time. We had protests against the elections, but there was a kind of, I'm not going to say resignation, but difficulty to see what you do against this type of usurpation of power. But when it hits on the existential in Georgia, and this decision of 27th of November is existential, it's saying, no, you're going to go back under the Russian, whatever, domination sphere. It's all the same for any Georgian. And on that, it's no, and it's massive protests, and those protests will not stop. Yesterday evening, when everybody was saying, oh, they're withering away, it's not going to happen, 100,000 people were on the streets. And that's going to continue because it's vital. It's no longer about an election. It's no longer about a party that has lost or won or whatever. It's about the fate of Georgia, it's about the freedom of Georgia, and that's something on which Georgian resilience has been building up over centuries.
And as sometimes...
And I don't know anything more about Mr. Ivanishvili, because very quickly he stopped talking to me, and then on he stopped talking to almost everyone. I think he's talking to probably 5 people around him just to give his instructions.
But just, I think it was like 2 or 3 days ago that you could see was just like a comedy, almost like a comedy, but it's just to sell for a comedy, the incredible influence of billionaires, even in the US politics, when there was Elon Musk with his son in the White House and saying, we restore democracy, he said. And during that, and Donald Trump said, well, and this little boy has such a high IQ, and the boy said, shut up, you are not the president, go away. and that was the the sun.
I saw that. I don't know if it's real or not.
Yeah,
Did
this
that really
is,
happen?
I know, you know.
I saw the clip and my immediate thought was that's AI, but I don't know. I mean, here's where we are. I don't know who to ask to confirm it. You know,
and the platform where we all saw it belongs to the guy whose son that is. So it's pretty possible that it was manipulated, but we don't know. How did you regard the speech of Vladimir Zelensky when you heard him here?
So it was a impressive and moving speech. He doesn't always give good speeches, but I thought this one was excellent, and I thought his focus on the need right now for a clear and united European policy and a move in the direction of European security was absolutely right. And if, you know, of course, he sees this and from his point of view. But I mean, I think you know, we can all see it now. I mean, people get hung up on NATO and the EU and these different institutions, and you know, it's really a mistake. I mean, at this moment, what is really needed is a kind of coalition of the willing. You can call it whatever you want. All of the countries who are willing to be part of a new security system, and maybe it will leave out some European countries. You know, we've had a problem in the European Union of Hungary vetoing every single, almost every single decision about Ukraine. Well, maybe we need an institution or an organization or an informal alliance that just doesn't have Hungary in it, and then we can move on. And there's no need to destroy NATO or anything like that. NATO can go on existing. But in addition to that, we need, and it's something that includes, certainly that includes the UK, that includes Scandinavia, Poland, Germany, obviously, France, and whoever else wants to be in it. And we need to begin to thinking about much more. It always sounds boring to talk about procurement policy, but an end to duplication of different systems in different countries, a much more focused idea about how we build and make weapons. Maybe either a fund to ramp up military spending, or an even better idea to begin to finally make use of the $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets to go towards Ukraine. I mean, you know, we're living in a time of reduced budgets. You know, populations don't want to spend money on the army. There is money which there is a clear legal argument for it. After the invasion of Ukraine, there was a clear UN decision condemning the invasion. Russia owes this money as compensation for the destruction of Ukraine, and we could begin to use it right now. We could add to the Ukrainian defense industry, but we could also begin the reconstruction of Ukraine using this money. I mean, it's insane not to use it. And one could do it in chunks, you know, take $50 billion and tell the Russians, you know, stop the war, or we'll take another 50 billion. I mean, there are many. I've heard a lot of creative ideas, and this is something that should clearly be done. And this is an idea I've had for a long time, and maybe I don't know how this audience will appreciate it or not, but I mean, an idea of having a European army, a European legion. We could let the French run it. You know, they have their own foreign legion. For Europeans who want to be part of an army and don't have the opportunity in their own countries. I just begin to think about how we would use these existing joint projects. Just begin to operationalize them and think about how to use them in a real way. Because we are coming into a new era when Europe needs to be a security power in addition to being a regulatory power. And by the way, I appreciate the EU as a regulatory power, but Europe needs to have a voice and an ability to shape events, in order to shape what happens next, or else others will decide for Europe. And this is really, I don't know what language to use to emphasize it enough, but we are at a real turning point, and Europe needs to make that decision now.
To continue on that line, I think that absolutely right that what has been, and that my old French voice that is talking, the ever coming European security and defense policy, which has never started its time. But at the same time, and now from the Georgian standpoint, I would say that European foreign policy, where is it? If European Union cannot have a foreign policy towards what's happening in Georgia, a small country which has been completely turned towards the European Union, if there is no common strict position because of Hungary, Hungary which dares to come the day after the elections and recognize the elections and the government, why do the rest of the European Union don't dare to have a clear position, even if it's a coalition of different countries that come together and say that is our foreign policy toward this country? If not there, then when, where, and where?
So if I understand...
Yeah, and also, let me say one other thing. You know, Europe has given, has given as much or almost as much, or in some, by some calculations, more money to Ukraine than the United States, and has given an enormous number of weapons, and has been very important in, for example, the development of the Ukrainian drone industry, which I don't know if people realize is now a major factor in the war. The Ukrainians built more than 1 million drones last year, and they're going to do it again 4 times as much probably this year. And there is a European presence already, and it is important and vital. And I have a friend a Ukrainian friend who's here today, who was at a meeting with the Danish Prime Minister and was trying to run to catch up with her just to tell her thank you because her husband is working on a project that's funded by the Danish military. I mean, so they're very clear. They're very clear connections. It's just that it hasn't gelled into a single force or a single voice, and it's missing 1 or 2 big components that the U.S. has. So we're not that far away. It's not like it's something unimaginable. You know, it's simply a matter of finding a way to structure it and speak about it and use it in a way that is equivalent to what the United States can do.
And first of all, maybe a sentence that we have, like it's like 20 years old. I think Europe of different speeds, so that we need to split up or to find different coalition of the willing. I don't know. We had many sentences for. So would that be the first step? I'm not, people in Europe, and this is where my, American heritage comes through, and people in Europe become very hung up on these institutions and organizations, and that we have to do it this way through the EU or so on. I mean, I feel that this is a moment of emergency, and maybe we need a different institution, or we need to rethink the way we're doing it. If it's the case that Hungary blocks every decision, and that we're going to have to, be terrified about the Romanian election, because it will block the rest of Europe, then we need something else, and I feel that it's time to be flexible and to make a big, bold step and move in a different direction. I don't really care what you call the European Defense Alliance or but it needs to come into being and to have a coherent voice and a presence. And there are a number of it. There was a meeting a few days ago. There's a 6-country grouping, which is Poland, Poland, Germany, France, UK, Spain, Italy. Maybe that's the group. Maybe there's another group that that Scandinavia and the Baltic states is another. Doesn't matter. But just that there begins to be a group of European countries who care about security and speak with one voice. And well, in Germany we are just 1 week ahead of the next election, so maybe this was one of the reasons why, in my point of view, German politics were not so present here at the conference. Maybe I'm wrong. Is there, looking at German politics, is there a party or a politician that gives you hope, or that you are in favor of for the next election?
I am not going to interfere in German elections. No, really. I mean, sorry, I don't have German citizenship. You guys choose who you want.
Don't let yourself be impressed by the American.
Well, as we are maybe to come close to the end of the time, as we are here in the Literaturhaus, I would ask you if there are, well, if there's a piece of literature that you might have read in the last years that leads you away or tells you something about the present situation now, or maybe even about the future.
No time for reading in the last year, but Kafka. Kafka.
That's Kafka.
So I think it's time to read really closely into the history of the end of the Roman Republic.
Wow. Good. So thank you very much indeed for coming here this morning, Sunday morning in Munich. Thanks very much for your time, and thanks very much
thank you,
Applebaum and
thank
Salome Zourabichvili for your time.